In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Vampiric Knight build. This is a New Game Plus build that's focus is on regaining health per swing, as well as using other items that help keep your health topped off, making you very, very difficult to kill. I do want to note that you can use this build in your first playthrough, though you probably won't be able to get everything for it until about halfway through the game. So it's not something you can use from the very beginning of the game all the way through your first playthrough in a New Game Plus, like some of the builds we've been doing recently. But you could do it for about half of the game and then continue on into New Game Plus with it. So first up, let's talk about the weapon we're using for this build. We are using the Butchering Knife here. This is technically a Great Axe. You've probably seen this in my Great Axe video, even though it looks like a giant sword. But the claim to fame of this weapon is that it allows you to regain 1% of your max HP when you hit an enemy with a swing. And even though that might not seem like a lot, because let's say your max HP is about 1500, that's like 15 HP, that might not be a lot. When you add all of the other factors together that give us HP back, it really starts to add up into one build that makes you very, very difficult to kill. When it comes to the Ash of War and affinities on this weapon, I have put the Wild Strikes Ash of War on here and set it to the Keen affinity. The Keen affinity is only really good on this Great Axe. If you saw the Great Axe video, you'll understand that most Great Axes have very high strength requirements, making it kind of moot to then put points into Dexterity. But the Butchering Knife only has 16 strength requirement, and the shield we're using for this build has 22 anyway. So Keen actually comes out to be higher damage than Heavy with this weapon, so that's why we went with Keen. But Wild Strikes is an exceptionally good weapon skill, and what's really good about it on this build is the more you swing with it, obviously you regain more health as you hit repeatedly over and over, which is good. But the also R1 attacks and R2 attacks, which you probably won't see too much in this video because they're not super necessary, can be absolutely devastating as well, helping you AoE enemies with the R1, or break the poise or stance break an enemy with the R2, particularly good on hard-to-kill enemies like Crucible Knight or bosses or things like that. You gain the Butchering Knife by defeating Anastasia Tarnished Eater near the Shaded Castle, so this is quite a ways into the game. You could probably beeline it there if you just went and picked up the two halves of the medallion, went up the lift, and then ran straight there. So it doesn't have to take you a long time to get this if you know where to go, but if you're just playing normally, it's going to be about half the game or so, 40% of the game or so before you get this weapon if you're playing like in a normal fashion. Next up, we're using the Icon Shield in our offhand for a couple reasons. First, it's a great shield allowing you to do block counters more easily because of the hardness of the shield. Enemies rebuff off of it with their attacks more often, allowing you to get a follow-up counter attack much more easily. And secondly, it's because it regains 3 HP over time. So between that and the Blessed Dew Talisman, which is one of the talismans that we use, we're going to have plus 5 HP regain constantly with this build. And between that and the Butchering Knives regain 1%. That's a lot of HP that you're going to get back as you just naturally explore levels and areas and attack enemies. Additionally, this Great Shield only has a 22 strength requirement, which means we only need 6 more points than the Butchering Knife anyway. And even though we're set to Keen on the Butchering Knife, that means we're not wasting as many points into strength as we could be. Now, when it comes to armor, it's not super important what you use as long as you're aiming to get to that 51 poise breakpoint so you can tank a hit. Here I have a couple pieces of Hoslow's armor with the Great Helm and one other piece in order to hit that 51 armor breakpoint, but whatever you want to use here works totally fine. I do want to mention, though, that if you are using the Mimic Tier, if you're someone who likes to use the Mimic Tier as your Spirit Ashes and you like to play the game with Spirit Ashes, that the Deathbed Dress is not a bad choice. The reason for this is that it slowly replenishes HP of your Mimic Tier when your Mimic Tier is nearby, and since your Mimic Tier will also have this equipped when summoned with this while you're wearing it, it will heal you for 2 HP when you're near your Mimic Tier. So this can work really well if you plan to, stay near your Mimic Tier, or if you plan to use your Mimic Tier throughout areas of the game, but otherwise it's not really great if you don't use your Mimic Tier or you don't use Spirit Summons. It's not necessarily going to benefit you at all. And another honorable mention for armor here is the Royal Remain set. This gives you 2 HP per second per piece equipped. You'll probably be able to equip 3 pieces of this and then 1 heavier piece in order to hit 51 poise, which is really nice. I don't like to leave but this only works up until like 18 to 20% of your max HP and then it stops. So this is kind of like if you're in the danger zone. But generally, when you're in the danger zone, you're going to, use a health pot. So that's not something I feel like is really necessary for this build. But if you're someone who also likes to use the Mimic Tier, then keep in mind your Mimic Tier will get this when they're in the danger zone. And Mimic Tiers tend to take way less damage than you. So when you add up the Blessed Dew Talisman, the Icon Shield, and the 3 pieces of this, I probably get like around 11 HP per second, which can easily get them back up to about 18 to 20% health, which is a lot of health for them because they don't take as much damage as you. So it's not bad if you tend to let your Mimic Tier do a lot of heavy lifting, but otherwise I wouldn't recommend using it. So when it comes to Talismans, if you're not using the Mimic Tier, I basically have two setups. I have Ritual Sword Talisman, which increases your damage when you're at max health. Obviously, we're trying to stay at max health all the time. We have the Blessed Dew Talisman, as I mentioned, to give you HP over time. We have Shard of Alexander to increase the damage of your Wild Strikes. And we have Taker's Cameo in order to give you more health when you defeat an enemy. So this is generally my landscape setup. So as I'm going around on the landscape, or if I'm doing like a little dungeon or whatever, this is what I have equipped in order to keep my HP topped up all the time and to deal increased damage. However, when you go into boss fights, you're rarely able to stay at max HP most of the time. Even with this setup, you won't be at full HP the vast majority of the time unless you're like a god tier player. So what I do in this case is I swap out Taker's Cameo and Ritual Sword Talisman and put in Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. You don't need Taker's Cameo in a boss fight because you don't kill enemies in a boss fight, so that's kind of useless in a boss fight. So putting something like Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman there to give you more protection is great. And then the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia is going to boost your damage as you strike with Wild Strikes and use your R1 and R2s out of your Wild Strikes, which will give you more damage the way Ritual Sword Talisman was giving you more damage, but you're doing it differently. Instead of staying at max health, you're going to get it from hitting repeatedly, which is the strategy you're going to employ when you are fighting bosses, trying to hit them hard and often. So what I really like about this build is that the damage is relatively good. Butchering Knife doesn't have the highest attack rating of a lot of the weapons in this game, but when you can just sit there and hold L2 with Wild Strikes, you have a lot of stamina with this build. It deals incredible damage, you have very high poise, meaning it's very hard for you to be interrupted when this is happening, and you're regaining health with each time you connect with an enemy, which might be multiple enemies at the same time, and that works exceptionally well. And again, this is an absolute blast to play if you're someone who enjoys using the Mimic Tier, because they gain so much health with this, they very rarely die. And, you know, getting those attacks back from the Butchering Knife, they love to use Wild Strikes, by the way, which helps them regenerate health. Icon Shield and Blessed Dew Talisman are regenerating health the whole time. A couple things I will note, though, that Taker's Cameo doesn't heal them. It heals you when they kill an enemy. So if you want something that benefits both of you, you might want to swap that out for something like the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. That'll benefit both you guys. Same goes for Ritual Sword Talisman. This is, most of the time, the Mimic Tier doesn't stay at full health, in my opinion. I mean, they will in easy fights, but if you, really get them involved in fights, they rarely stay at full health. So they're not going to gain the benefit of Ritual Sword Talisman. Now, you will, but they won't. So maybe you want to put something else there that benefits them as well, so that they get the benefit and you get the benefit of that slot. Moving along to the stats we have for this build, I have 51 Vigor, 25 Mind, 31 Endurance, 22 Strength, 80 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, 7 Faith, and 9 Arcane. You can completely disregard Intelligence, Faith, and Arcane for this build. We don't need any. I have 16 because I started as an Astrologer. That is not optimized. You don't need any in that. So if you start as a different class, you'll have a much better stats spread. 51 Vigor is there because having high health for this build is good. Butchering Knife gives you HP back based on your max HP, so the higher that is, the more you're going to gain back. So that's really nice. Getting this up to 60 will be a priority for you at this point. You don't really need to increase damage much more. 25 Mind is great for this build. It's probably, I don't know that I would go too much higher. You don't use a lot of FP when you're using Wild Strikes unless you use a follow-up R1 or R2. And a lot of times you don't even need to do that. So you're not going to use a lot of FP most of the time. I typically have 10 health flasks and 4 FP flasks, and that's plenty between checkpoints. So I don't think you need to increase Mind at all past that point. Endurance is at 31 in order for us to be able to use all this equipment and still medium roll and also use Wild Strikes, over and over and over while we're not completely running out of stamina. If you want to have heavier protection, it's not a bad idea to take Endurance higher. This will give you more stamina for Wild Strikes, etc. But give you more protection. Then again, if you're using a Mimic Tier, will translate over to your Mimic Tier, which is nice. 22 Strength is simply there to meet the requirement for Butchering Knife and Icon Shield. Butchering Knife being 16, Icon Shield being 22. It's kind of wasted in this build in a damage sense because we have Keen Scaling on the Butchering Knife, but Keen Scaling is going to give you the most damage at this point. That's why we have 80 Dexterity. It really drops off after that point. However, at some point, and I've done some testing on this, I'm not exactly sure what the number is, if you go the Quality Infusion on the Butchering Knife, it will outperform Keen. But even at 50 Strength and 50 Dexterity, you're still getting about 50 less points than you are Keen, so in terms of attack rating. So it's probably around 65 Strength, 65 Dexterity, or 70 Strength, 70 Dexterity. So it's a ways off, and it's quite a bit of investment just to get a little bit more damage, so I'm not thinking it's something you're going to do right away. you're better off focusing on getting your vigor up a bit and endurance up a bit. And then all the other points after that will go into dexterity. And then at some point, you'll respec into some sort of quality setup if you're going to continue on through NG Plus and NG++. Now, when it comes to Flasks and Wonders Physique for this build, I like to use the one that gives you stamina back, because you do use a lot of stamina with this build. And also the one that increases your damage with successive attacks. That's a strategy we employ on bosses, using the Rotten Wing Sword insignia with Wild Strikes. And this is only going to increase your damage more and more as you do this. This allows you to absolutely shred bosses, so it's a good addition here. Now, when it comes to Great Runes for this build, I prefer to use something like Ricard's Great Rune. This gives you health back when you kill an enemy, or you could use Melania's Great Rune, which gives you HP back as you swing, giving you that more vampiric feeling. However, some of these Great Runes, like Melania's, is only available for a very small part of the game, and then when you go to New Game Plus, it's gone. Same thing with Ricard's, although you can get Ricard's much sooner. So you probably use Godric's early on and then swap over to Ricard's. It doesn't take you that long to get to Volcano Manor, maybe 10-15 hours in New Game Plus. So you can get this relatively quickly, and then you'll start getting more HP back on kill. But I do want to note that if you're using the Mimic Tier, they will not benefit from this. They don't benefit from Great Runes, so don't expect your Mimic Tier to get increased performance from that. So that wraps up our Vampiric Knight build. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This one was a ton of fun for me to play. Probably one of my favorite overall builds, just because of you summon your Mimic Tier and you guys just go to town. You're healing each other, especially if you're using the deathbed dress next to each other, even though you guys kind of look silly. You just don't die. You keep healing each other. It's really, really good. And, you know, again, you could probably add faith to this build and give some spells to keep your Mimic Tier alive, or make you, have more HP regen. That's something you could do. But again, people have been critiquing me for builds that have too many buffs. And I actually really enjoy that there aren't any buffs in this build. You're just playing. You just play the game, drop your Mimic Tier when you want, or not if you don't want, and it's a ton of fun. Stay tuned for more Elden Ring content. I'm going to try and get one more build video this week, and I'm going to be working on some other Elden Ring videos as well. Maybe some weapons I like the best, or shields I like the best. I know people are asking for videos on shields as well, and also like Sacred Seals and Staffs. I have videos planned for Sacred Seals and Staffs. Obviously, they'll be a little bit different format than these, because there isn't a moveset and isn't infusions. But we'll obviously be talking about scaling in those, why you might use them, when you might not use them, etc. Additionally, we are going to move into some Harry Potter content. Hogwarts Legacy is about 3.5 weeks away. This is a game that I'm really looking forward to. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, so I'll be getting into some of that. So if you guys have things you want to see about that game, please let me know in the comments below.